Good evening, and welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, we leave the safety of the trailhead and follow 8 true encounters from hikers who learn the woods listen, and sometimes answer back. These aren't campfire exaggerations or viral creepypasta. They come from park rangers, search and rescue logs, trail cams, and first-hand accounts recorded after nights no one wants to remember. Each story is grounded in reports and witness statements, tracing a map of places where the path simply stops being the safest way through. What you're about to hear tests the thin line between nature's silence and the presence that fills it when the wind dies and footsteps multiply behind you. If you're new here, subscribe to Whispers at Night for true horror every night, and tap the bell so you never miss what waits beyond the switchbacks. Now, pull your headlamp close and step carefully, because on these trails, the trees hold their breath, the dark leans in, and something that wasn't there before is matching your pace. The dogs didn't lose the trail gradually. They hit a point in the woods and unraveled, barking, whining, pacing in tight circles like they'd smacked into glass. Then nothing. 6 canine teams from 3 counties, all trained on wilderness tracks, and every single one stopped at the exact same patch of moss, 40 feet from a stainless bottle that was standing perfectly upright against a rotten log. No scuffs, no dirt. Half full, ice still clinking. I've volunteered on search and rescue for 8 years. I've hauled dehydrated tourists off switchbacks and followed missing bow hunters through sleet. I've never seen a scent line end like a severed rope. The missing hiker was personal. Ashley Carpenter, my roommate's kid sister, 24, newly licensed RN with a Harborview start date circled on her calendar. She texted her mom a summit selfie at 11:45 am. Peace sign, that big dimpled grin, her red boots peeking into the frame. The new uneasy, she'd vanished off a trail she could hike half asleep. The Granite Lake Loop in the Cascade foothills. 5 miles total. Bridges over the creeks, trail signs every junction. On an August Saturday, it's practically a parade. When she missed her Pink's 7 miles Pamdik hospital shift, her supervisor called her emergency contact. Ashley's ratty Subaru was still at the trailhead. Hiking permit on the dash with a written, "Back by 4 p.m." The front seat held a nursing textbook, a bag of jerky, the parking stub tucked into the visor. Nothing looked wrong, and that was the first terrible sign. I joined the ground teams at First Light Sunday. We expected a sprain, a wrong turn, a red-faced, embarrassed "I'm so sorry" in the underbrush. Day 2 erased that hope. At 11 Sam, Frank, white hair, knees that click like old hinges, spotted a slice of blue down an embankment thick with Devil's Club and blackberry. It was Ashley's insulated bottle, upright, identical, scratched into the base. AMC, still cold inside. 20 feet upslope, snagged in a hemlock, was her purple packable rain shell, like someone had thrown it underhand and walked away. We called in more dogs. Handlers scented them off Ashley's sleeping bag from the Subaru and walked them up the main trail. Every team traced the same arc, past the 2-mile marker, left onto a barely there deer path, straight into a stand of hemlock where the ground went springy with moss. And then 40 feet from the bottle, every dog braked. Some backed up and sat. Duke the bloodhound, who found a kid in a blizzard 2 winters ago, threw his head back and howled so low it shivered the trees. Diane, our search coordinator, had us sweep from that spot shoulder to shoulder. The terrain felt wrong. Not a meadow, not dense forest. Circles of open canopy like someone had cut skylights. The moss was deep enough to swallow impressions. Soil underneath, black, loamy, chemical sweet. We found deer and raccoon prints at the edges. No human tracks beyond the dog's stopping point. Forensics photographed bagged cores of dirt. Brought in ground-penetrating radar. The screen kept glitching. The operator muttering he'd never seen densities bounce like that. By Wednesday, we'd expanded out nearly 2 miles. My partner that day was George, a retired firefighter who said the birds were off. He was right. Those woods are usually noisy with jays and chickadees. It felt like someone had hit mute. We were edging a side ravine when George crushed my forearm. 50 feet below, half hidden behind the root ball of a fallen cedar. The ground was carved, not eroded, not pawed, a clean rectangle. We flagged it and called Diane. The team moved like a crime scene unit. Photos, perimeter tape, a careful dig. The pit was about 6 by 3 by 4 feet. Corners crisp as a picture frame. Walls smoothed and tamped, empty. At the bottom, a pattern pressed into the dirt. Repeat marks like someone had laid objects in a sequence. Not letters, not numbers, rhythm. A forensics tech shot it from every angle. The smell made the hair on my arms stand up, sharp and metallic like pennies washed in antifreeze. While they worked, I circled the root ball and saw it. Ashley's phone wedged in a seam of wood. Spiderweb crack across the screen. Burrito Presenti battery. We scrolled with Diane standing over my shoulder. After the Ald 11:45 am summit shot, there were 17 more pictures time-stamped between 1:45 p.m. and 1:55 p.m., each one pitch black. Metadata said they were all taken within 100 feet of that pit. But the altitude readings jumped up and down like she'd been riding an elevator through the soil. Her messages showed a thread from 3 days earlier with a number saved as Paul. Not in her contacts, no last name. He'd sent a single drop pin, no words. Ashley had replied, "Confirmed for Saturday." When detectives ran the number, it traced to a burner bought with cash at a Tacoma gas station. One activation, one text thread. The security footage showed a man in a hat and sunglasses paying for a prepaid phone and a coffee. Average everything, a ghost you could stand behind in line and never notice. Friday morning, a lost tourist from Ohio stumbled into the ranger station at Snoqualmie Pass pale and shaking. He'd wandered off trail and found a campsite that wasn't a campsite. The photos on his phone made everyone in the room go quiet. Hidden in an old-growth cluster were blinds, like hunter blinds, but smarter. Tarps mottled with paint and real branches, netting laced with moss, each blind positioned to watch a junction without ever being seen. Inside, maps of the entire trail network with dates penciled beside specific bends, notebook stacks, a pair of binoculars, a small case of plastic cuffs and pre-cut lengths of rope. No name for Ashley on those maps, but I recognized other names. Women in their 20s and 30s who had wandered off in the past 2 years. Things the community had chalked up to accidents or walked away lives. Within hours, the FBI had the mountain closed. Unmarked vans. Equipment I couldn't categorize. They found 6 more blinds spread like a net. Same camouflage, same view lines. The notebooks were worse than any of us wanted to imagine. Trail counts by day and hour. Notes on repeaters. Descriptions as cold as inventory. Hair color, pack brand, pace, who usually hiked alone. Ashley's red boots were mentioned twice. Someone knew she tended to start at 9 a.m. Preferred counterclockwise. Parked along the second line of cars when the first was full. Handwriting analysis suggested at least 3 authors. DNA on duct tape rolls and a food wrapper led to 2 men. Neither matched anyone in our missing persons files. Both swore they'd never touched a soul. They said work came through encrypted messages. Watch this trail, record this pattern, restock the blinds, get paid in crypto at dead drop sites. Collections were someone else's job, someone they never met. It sounded like a story a public defender feeds a client. The problem was the part that wasn't a story. Day 8. Cadaver dogs alerted in a depression 5 miles from any official path. An oval bowl under a woven ceiling of branches and devil's clubs so thick it clawed your clothes. We macheted in. The smell found us first. 8 sets of remains surfaced over 2 days. Some bones clean, some still gripped by dirt. A forensic anthropologist gave us rough spans. Oldest maybe 18 months, newest a few weeks. 8 of the 12 names from the notebooks were accounted for, not Ashley. The feds widened the dragnet, gas station footage for 50 miles. Trailhead cams, land use permits, dead drop soil casts. They pulled 2 men off warrants tied to the blinds. Both face conspiracy charges. Without a victim, without a living witness, their leverage, not closure. The person who designed the blinds, who set the watch points, chose the dates, pressed that pattern into the bottom of an empty hole. Still vapor. The official search for Ashley paused after 2 weeks. The criminal case didn't. Her family hired a PI and a drone team. Tip lines light up and burn out. A woman swears she saw red boots in North Bend. A hiker posts a blurry photo of a figure in purple near a service road. None of it holds. Sometimes I drive up anyway. The trailhead is wrapped in chain link and keep out placards now. I stand with my fingers threaded in the fence and stare into the trees until the pixels crawl in my vision. I think about the exact spot where scent stopped as if the air itself refused to carry it. I think about 17 black photos with altitude bouncing like a trapped bird. I think about a bottle set carefully against a mossy log, upright in a place where nothing is upright for long. People tell me she ran. People tell me she fell. People tell me the woods take what they want. The last one is the only thing that matches what we saw. The truth is simpler and worse. Someone watched those trails like a job. They studied. They took notes. They tested chemicals you can absorb through skin. They penciled names on maps and erased them. They built blind spots and waited for people who felt safe. Ashley Carpenter stepped into one of those blind spots at Etalai 2 Mandenorin 1 Sipantar on a sunny Saturday and never stepped back out. And whoever designed that, whoever wrote the rules for where the dogs go silent and the ground stops telling the truth, that person is still writing. Last October I was 24, selling boots and stoves at an outdoor shop in Santa Fe, and burning my weekends on trails with coworkers. We prided ourselves on being the people who'd rather be at a trailhead by 7 motoyames than asleep. That Saturday looked like every other fall adventure. Sky rinsed blue, air crisp enough to sting your nose. The kind of day that makes aspens look like they're plugged into a wall outlet. Our crew was 4. Me, my coworker Cohen, his girlfriend Mireya, and our friend Thatch. Instead of the busy ski basin routes, we picked a lesser-known system on the north side of the Jemez, about 2 hours from town. The map promised an 8-mile lollipop through old logging cuts and mixed ponderosa piñon country, with enough elevation to make your legs sing, but not so much you'd bonk. We joked we'd see nothing more exotic than deer and wild turkeys and be home by 4 me. With green chili cheeseburgers in our future, 3 miles in, call it Duriam. Cohen spotted the ghost of a road peeling off the main track. 2 faint brown stripes stitched with kinnikinnick and fallen needles. Old Skid Road, he said, already grinning. Bet it hits a forgotten mine. In New Mexico, you can throw a rock and hit somebody's boom and bust leftovers. We weren't racing daylight, so we followed our curiosity. The spur hadn't seen tires in years. Gamble oak lashes tagged our shins, and we ducked under low flagging branches every dozen steps. After 15 minutes of pushing through scrub, the trees thinned to a small clearing patched with sun. The smell hit first, wet fabric, mouse nest, something metallic under it. Then we saw the thing making the smell. A white cargo van slumped in the grass like a beached whale. Early 2000s by the body lines. Windshield polka dotted with pine sap and brown with dust. Tires pancaked. Door seams furred with rust. Beer cans and a burned ring of stones littered the ground nearby, as if others had used the husk as a windbreak. Its rear doors were ajar by an inch or two, like someone had tried to close them and the latch never caught. Thatch cracked a bad serial killer joke. We chuckled because that's what you do when your stomach tightens, and nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Mireya hung back. The rest of us crunched over broken glass and needles. Cohen used a dead branch to ease the doors open. The hinges screamed the way hinges only scream when they haven't moved in seasons. Inside, the light fell on a yard sale apocalypse. Women's things everywhere, purses and wallets, a scatter of shoes from hiking boots to strappy flats, tangled necklaces, clamshell flip phones and newer slabs with spidered screens. None of it matched. None of it looked like it belonged to the same person. Riveted into the interior sheet metal were heavy steel loops with short lengths of chain attached, the kind you see in photos of prison transports. On the plywood floor under 2 of the loops, there were dark stains sunk into the grain. Old but not old enough to be gone, Mireya's voice was papery. We need to call the cops. Sensible. We all pulled out our phones anyway, even though you don't get bars that deep among those ridges. 0 service. 4 tiny SOS badges lighting up uselessly. Back to the main trail, Thatch said, already retreating. We can run the ridge to the truck. That's when something heavy snapped a dead branch behind us. Not animal light-footedness. Weight. Deliberate. Every sound in the clearing went bright in my head. The fly that had found something sweet on the van's bumper. Cohen's backpack strap creaking. My own breath suddenly too loud. Another stick broke. Closer. From the direction we'd come, cutting off the spur we'd followed in. Cohen's hand found a rock. Thatch unfolded his pocket knife like it was going to matter. I grabbed a wrist-thick branch lying by the stump of an old fence post. Mireya lifted her phone, filming because sometimes that's the only thing you can think to do with your hands when you can't dial. The footsteps stopped just beyond the scrim of pinon and oak. Then the whistling started. Slow, easy, a nothing tune you hum when you've got nowhere to be. Pan's voice followed, warm like a friendly uncle bumping into you at a hardware store. Well, hey there, folks. Didn't expect company way out here. Y'all lost? Cohen darted a glance upslope to our right where a faint deer path stitched the hill. If we ran, that was our door. It was the only one. The whistling resumed closer. He stepped through the brush like he'd rehearsed it. Mid-50s by the weather in his face. Flannel shirt soft with wear, faded jeans, old leather belt, baseball cap with the logo worn to a ghost. He smiled the kind of smile you want to like. Crow's feet, nice teeth. In his left hand, a cheap telescoping fishing rod. A daypack rode his shoulders. His boots were wrong, mud fresh enough to shine wet in. Spots even though this side of the Jemez hadn't seen rain since September and the ground under our feet was powder dry. He clocked the van and something moved under the mask for half a heartbeat. Then the kindly expression was back like a curtain drop. Oh, you found my project. He angled himself with unstudied care so that he stood between us and both the skid road and our goat path escape. Bought that old thing at auction. Figured I'd kit it out in camp. You know how life gets. The words came too fast, too shaped. Thatch matched him, cheer for cheer. We were just poking around. We'll get back on the main line. Where's your truck parked? His grin widened, but his eyes didn't change. I know these cuts better than the map. I can show you a shortcut. He leaned the fishing rod against a pinon. His right hand didn't leave his jacket pocket. Whatever it held bulged against the nylon and stayed pointed at the ground. Until it wouldn't, I kept thinking. Mireya had her phone at hip level now, still recording. I could see the red dot on the screen reflected in the van's greasy paint. He saw it too. Something tightened along his jaw. That a good phone? Doesn't matter what carrier I try out here. Never works. Cohen saved our lives with the dumbest, smartest acting I've ever seen. He folded, palms to his stomach, gagging like he was going to bring up breakfast right there on the pine duff. It was so sudden and human that the man stepped back on reflex, right hand sliding free of his pocket empty, because nobody wants to take puke to the boots. Thatch yanked Mireya's wrist. Run! Everything exploded. Cohen shot left into scrub so thick it clawed his shirt to ribbons. Thatch and Mireya sprinted for the deer path upslope. I faked a move toward them, then juked back through the laurel to slingshot around the van and dive into a mottled corridor of oak and rock. Behind us, the friendly tone cracked clean off his voice. Hey! Heavy feet churned duff. He'd picked a target. I didn't want to know which. Branches lashed my face. Something ripped at my calf. I hurdled a deadfall and landed wrong, stayed up by luck, kept going because stopping felt like a synonym for dying. The forest became a smear of brown and gold. Once I heard someone, Mireya I think, shout my name. Once I heard the man's whistling again, short and sharp, like a signal. The ground dropped and I half fell, half ran down a drainage, fighting for balance on rounded cobbles, then clawed back up the opposite side on hands and knees. I burst onto a wider track, another logging road. This one more recent, with tire scars faint in the dust and tufts of rabbit brush reclaiming the crown. I slowed to a ragged jog because sprinting on marbles is a good way to break an ankle, and listened with my whole skin. A voice lanced through the trees to my left. Here! Thatch and Mireya crouched behind a jackstraw of fallen trunks, faces scratched and white. Mireya still had the phone clenched in both hands like a rosary. We stayed there, watertight with fear, counting our own breaths for a long minute. No whistling. No crack of brush. Just a jay somewhere upridge cussing out the world. Cohen crashed in from a different direction, shirt torn, arm strip mined by oak. He looked sick and alive and very surprised to see us, which is a flavor of joy I'll never forget. He'd waded a trickle of water and doubled back in his own footprints to lose the chase. We didn't hug. We didn't talk much. We moved. We jog-walked that road until it shouldered into a real Forest Service line. A brown post someone had shot 3 times. A faded number? A little stack of cairned rocks where hikers had reminded other hikers this was, in fact, a way. It took 2 hours, call it me with 45 pui, when my watch ticked over, before the gravel of the trailhead parking fanned out under a sky that looked like it couldn't hold a storm if it tried. Thatch's Tacoma sat where we'd left it. Sun-cooked and dust-scumbled and heartbreakingly ordinary. Bars bloomed on our screens like mercy. Mireya dialed re-911, while Thatch turned the key so we could jump if we had to. The dispatcher kept us talking as if words were a cord they could drag us in on. Where exactly? What did we see? Was anyone hurt? Describe the man. Describe the van. Describe the restraints. 20 minutes later, 2:15 p.m., 2 county units rolled in on a wash of engine fan and crunching gravel. A gray-haired deputy watched Mireya's video, her mouth flattening to a line the longer it played. She radioed while it was still rolling, using words like additional units and possible linkage. Linkage to what? She didn't tell us then. We gave statements, separately at first, then as a group, then separately again. Because that's how they do it when they're serious. We went down to the little station by 4:45 p.m., sat on hard chairs and retold the story until the edges of it blurred. They showed us photo arrays. The man wasn't in any of them. A detective with coffee breath and a tired badge. Bresson, I think. James Waver finally leveled with us near Sold 15 p.m. 3 women had vanished from trails within an hour's drive of where we'd been. All in the last 18 months. Strong hikers. No bad weather. Cars left at trailheads like their owners planned to be gone only long enough to earn that first flush of endorphin. The purses in the van, the phones, the shoes. They might match. They found the clearing we described around 9:30 p.m. They didn't find the van. Tire tracks scrolled away into the trees. Some trash, a shucked-off coil of chain. 2 weeks later, the detective called again at 7:15 a.m. They'd found a van matching the description. Burned to its bones in a ravine 50 miles west. Plates melted, VIN scorched. No prints, no fibers, no anything. It might as well have been a dream charred into scrap. They kept in touch for months. We squinted at more photo sheets. We tried to remember if the man's left eye had a freckle in the iris, maybe. Or if his ring finger was tan-lined. No. Or whether the boots had a pronounced outside edge wear. Yes. Nothing ever landed. The girls stayed missing. The man who hummed old nothing tunes in the understory became the exact kind of nobody you pass at a gas station and forget an hour later. It got inside our lives in the ways big things do, sideways and slow. Cohen put in for a transfer to El Paso and left by Thanksgiving. Mireya and Thatch drifted apart, not because they didn't care, I think, but because lightning had struck their shared memory, and that's a hard place to build from. At the shop, I couldn't walk customers to the hidden gem rack without feeling like I'd handed them a loaded coin flip. When it rains now, I notice the fresh mud on people's boots. When I hear whistling on trail videos, my thumb jerks to the volume. When someone asks about quiet loops with fewer people, I steer them to well-signed, well-loved switchbacks with bathrooms and bored chipmunks, and a line of cars at 10 a.m. Detective Bresson called last month at 3:30 p.m. Another woman gone. Different trail, same pattern. Could I look at a fresh composite? Of course I could. Of course it wouldn't help. The way knowing a shadow is, there doesn't keep the light from moving. If you hike, if the mountains are your church and your hobby and your medicine, please listen to the boring advice that sounds like your mom. If you see a thing deep in the woods that shouldn't be there, that prickles the little animal in your head, you don't need to be brave. You don't need to be curious. You need to turn around, walk, then run when you can, until you are back in the world of trailheads and chatter and people who would notice you were gone. Some mysteries are not puzzles. They're traps with nice smiles, and some monsters hum a friendly tune while they set the hook. If you've never sweated through a July afternoon in the Kentucky hills, you don't really know what heat can do. It doesn't sit on your skin so much as sink under it. Wet, heavy, patient. I live in Lexington, service HVAC for a living. and I hike to get away from sheet metal cuts and customers who swear their thermostat is haunted. I'm careful about it. 8 years of solo trips will cure most show-off tendencies. I check weather twice, leave a route on my kitchen counter, keep my truck tidy so I can tell if a glove box has been rifled. That Saturday, late June, bright already at 7:30. I pointed my old Tacoma southeast and took the back way toward Daniel Boone National Forest. Not the tourist pull-offs near the gorge either. I'd marked a threadbare loop that used 2 neglected horse trails and a long, unmaintained ridge cut, a 15-ish mile figure 8 that stitched through hollows nobody photographs for brochures. I slid into the little gravel apron that passes for a trailhead, just a chewed-up signpost and a patch of sunburnt Queen Anne's lace and laced boots. 2 liters in a bladder, filter as insurance, jerky, peanuts, a rain shell, headlamp, paper topo in a Ziploc, a handheld GPS that saved me more than once, and the short fixed blade that rides my belt because habit is as good as luck. The forest took me in like it always does. Cicadas up in the oaks ran their ratchet chorus. Pileated woodpecker somewhere out of sight hacked at a dead snag, like it owed him money. Every 20 yards I face-planted a fresh spider web, apologized to the resident and carried on. The trail, such as it was, ducked through laurel tunnels, wandered past sandstone ledges that peeled like old paint, and crossed shallow cuts where iron stained the water a tea-brown. Sweat crawled down my temples and salted my lips. If you know the Boone, you know the smell, crushed fern, damp loam, spice from a busted sassafras twig, and the sharp green of summer baking itself. Miles went by in that good, blank way, body moving, brain idling. Around midday I heard real water off to my right. Not a trickle. A creek talking over rock shelves. My map showed a seasonal blue line a quarter-mile downslope, and the heat had me thinking about dunking my hat and forearms. I checked the GPS, took a bearing I didn't strictly need, and eased off the ridge. Laurel clawed, blackberry cane snagged, and a web found my beard anyway. Sound lies in these hills. What feels like 50 yards can be 3 times that. 20 minutes later, the slope eased. Leaf litter slicked underfoot, and I pushed through a final wall of mountain laurel into an opening that wasn't on any map I own. At first, my brain tried to make it a backpacker camp. Tarps, a fire scar, rope strung between trees. But then the scale and the smell sorted things for me. This was a settlement, ramshackle, half-hidden but big. 6, 7, maybe more shelter shapes made from blue tarps and barn tin, their edges chewed into scallops by wind. Pallets and plywood kept bedding off the mud. A fire pit wasn't even ringed, just a black oval. Ash still warm and feather light in a drift. Clothes hung on paracord like pennants, jeans in every waist and no inseams. A child's pink shirt ghosted white by sun. A floral dress that could have been someone's church best 4 summers ago. Trash broadcast everywhere. Bean tins with knife-cut lids bent back like tongues. White plastic cutlery, empty blister packs. Orange medicine bottles with names scraped off. And an army of plastic whiskey handles with their labels sweated off. And under the human funk and wet ash was a sharper note. Chemical and nasal, the kind of smell that sticks behind your eyes. I know solvents. I work with them. This wasn't lacquer thinner or acetone, but it lived in the same neighborhood. Every instinct I own said heel-toe backward and let the green swallow me. I was halfway into that when the little hairs along my forearms prickled. The forest near at hand had gone still. Cicadas up high still ground away. But close in there wasn't squirrel chatter. No toe tip of a chipmunk. I looked left. She stood half behind a fat pine, maybe 30 feet off. Mid-40s, hard to tell through the wear. Hair in ropes. Yellow tank top stained a dozen ways. Arms a mess of scratches and scabs. Her pupils were blown so wide it made her irises into halos. She didn't move, didn't call out. She just watched with that flat, drowned look that wakes up the hindbrain. "I'm sorry," I said, palm up like I might to a nervous dog. I wandered off looking for the creek. "I'll turn around." Nothing. Not so much as a blink. Movement ticked the corner of my vision at 3 o'clock, then 9, then somewhere behind my shoulder. That first watcher resolved into many. It's hard to be sure of numbers through laurel and heat shimmer, but I'd bet 8, 10 people ringed that clearing without showing their full bodies. A kid with a peach fuzz beard leaned against a skinny maple, arms folded, trying for casual and landing on spring-loaded. A woman sat on an overturned tote like she'd been poured there. A man with a shovel held it like a walking stick. Closest to me was a rickety table, really just a door laid across cinder blocks. On it, a cheap digital scale, a lineup of flip phones, a scatter of chargers, stacks of quart-sized baggies, some empty, some not. In one of the full ones, whatever it was, caught a fleck of sun and sparkled. The smell corkscrewed a little sharper. Somewhere behind the tarps, a zipper ran and a man stepped out. You can tell who's in charge without anyone saying it. He didn't just look cleaner. He looked composed. Gray button-down tucked into dark jeans, sleeves rolled. Leather boots that had seen polish at least once in their life. Silver hair pulled into a small, neat tail. He smiled like he'd practiced it in a mirror for tone. "Bit off the blazed path, aren't you?" he said, voice easy. Radio host easy. "These hollers will trick a gadget. GPS thinks straight lines. The land doesn't. Looking for water," I said. "I'll be out of your hair." "That's neighborly of you." His eyes did a slow tour, my hands, the knife on my belt, the GPS clipped to my strap, my face again. "You hiking alone?" Truth might have felt righteous, but fear moved my mouth. "My roommate's at the other trailhead," I said. "We're meeting at 5. If I don't ping, she gets mad. No bars out here." He flipped a battered phone open in his palm and closed it without looking. Smile didn't change, not since they pulled the old repeater. "Costs too much to keep the forgotten places connected." Behind him, a red-bearded bull of a man appeared from behind a tarp. A pale rope of scar pulled his cheek toward his ear. He swept the table clean of tidy piles with a casual arm and fed a black duffel. He didn't look at what he was bagging. His eyes stayed with me. Against a white oak a little ways off, rifles and a taped-up shotgun leaned like broomsticks at a back door. "I'd rather not make your acquaintance," I said. I tried to make it a joke. It tasted like a dry swallow. "Let me retrace and we'll both forget this. That's close to the solution." The silver-haired man smiled bigger. "We're private folks. The world doesn't have a place for us the way it used to, so we made one. Folks don't understand that. They point and call it names. You stepping into our yard puts us in a bind." The woman in the yellow tank dragged her nails down her neck until a bright bead popped. The kid by the maple adjusted his stance. A man I hadn't clocked yet shifted just enough for the bulge at his waistband to print against his shirt. Nobody raised a voice. They didn't need to. "Here's what I propose," the leader said. "You let my friend there." His chin tipped toward the red beard. "Take a look at any memory you're carrying. Pictures, pins, breadcrumbs. Then he and I will walk you someplace where you won't wander into our kitchen again. In exchange, you decide you never came this way. Everybody keeps breathing easy." I unclipped my GPS, unhooked my little camera, slid my phone from its pocket. It's amazing how fat your fingers feel doing something you're scared to do. The red beard unzipped the duffel like he'd worn the teeth shiny over time. He paged through my camera. Trees, a turtle, my own boot toes in a creek crossing. He scrolled my phone's gallery and never actually looked at the screen. Watched my face instead. He thumbed through the GPS history with a meatpacker's hands, grunted, and shook his head. "No marks," he said. The leader handed back the phone and the camera. He turned the GPS over in his palm, weighing it like a trout. "We'll keep this," he said pleasantly. "Tuition. You're getting an education today. You have my name too." It came out before I could edit it. I hated that I'd given him the satisfaction of hearing how my voice thinned. His smile went sleepy. "We know enough," he gestured. The ring around us breathed and released. He stepped off through laurel I wouldn't have chosen, and it softened for him like it had been taught to. I fell in behind because there was no other way to move, and the red beard settled 10 feet back with a rifle balanced in his arms like a baby. Muzzle down, safety on, all of which meant less than the plain fact of it there. We didn't talk. Once I stumbled on a slick patch of oak leaves and went to a knee, and the red beard said, "Up," in a tone you use on a stubborn dog. The leader didn't look back. The hollow swallowed our sound. Somewhere off to the left, a generator purred under a blanket. Then with a distance that felt like maybe a mile and was probably 100 yards, even that went to nothing. And all I could hear was my own breath and the cicadas turning the air into static. Time got weird. Terror will stretch it thin. I noticed ridiculous detail because my brain needed something finite to hold. A nick on the leader's watch bezel. The brand stamped into his boot heel, Lucchese. The way the Redbeard's shirt stuck where the leather sling darkened his shoulder. I thought about the shop. About how one of the guys would make a joke about me getting lost and I'd pretend it was funny. I thought about nothing at all. That's how fear works too. We stepped into the faint remains of an old roadbed, the classic 2 brown tracks with green running down their middle like a mohawk, and the leader stopped. He pointed north with an open hand like a nice preacher pointing toward the baptismal. "Your truck is that way," he said. 3 miles. If you keep a good march, you'll see it a little after 2. He cut the last few steps to erase our polite distance. Up close, I could smell coffee on his breath and a mint fighting a losing war with it. His voice dropped half a notch. "Listen to me," he said, words spaced like he'd counted them. "We leave people alone who leave us alone. This is our home. We have a long memory and short patience for folks who forget that. If uniforms or green hats start sniffing around, if questions get asked that sound like you fed them, I'll consider that a visit. We're good at finding people." The Redbeard chimed in, almost companionable. "Blue Toyota, right? Kentucky plates ending 529? Pretty truck. Would be a shame if a fool scraped a key down its side." "I understand," I said. It felt like pushing a cinder block uphill with my tongue. "I hope you do." He smiled like we'd agreed on a price at a yard sale. "Go on." They stepped sideways and the trees closed like water. I stared at the place they'd been until the green blurred. Then I moved, not running because running is loud. Not strolling because strolling is stupid, just that careful. Fast you use when you're leaving a bad bar before anybody notices you were. There. The old roadbed shouldered around. A knob and dipped through a glade where light sifted down through. Tulip poplar leaves and made the grass look like cut bottle glass. I counted 100 paces and glanced back. Leaves shifting. Nothing else. I counted again, glanced again. The 3rd time I realized how foolish it was and did it a 4th anyway. When the Tacoma flashed silver through the trees, my knees felt unreliable in a way I hated. I put my palm on the hood like it could tell me if I'd dreamed all of it. Glass unbroken. Tires fine. A limp flyer tucked under the wiper for a saw sharpening service 2 counties over. I slid in, locked the doors though I knew how pointless that was out here, and sat with my forehead on the wheel for a breath that didn't end. Then I drove, not fast. Gravel clatter sounds too much like other things when your head is wrong. I didn't turn the radio on. The AC coughed its familiar first hiss. The transmission whined a little in second on the grade just past the bridge like it always does. Ordinary noises in an ordinary truck. I held them like talismans all the way up the mountain parkway and into city traffic. Back at the duplex, I parked in a different part of the street without thinking about why. My pack looked smaller leaning against the wall, the empty GPS pocket like a missing tooth. I took a shower that reddened my shoulders and stood there until the hot water folded. That night, the neighborhood hum that usually lulls me, the show-off muffler down the block, somebody's bass turned down low, the train mourning out past New Circle, made me feel like I'd left a window open. I got up twice to check the front door. I told myself I was thirsty and drank from the tap, like that's why I was standing in my kitchen at 1:10. You want me to say I did the right thing after? That I called a ranger district office and left an anonymous tip, or told a sheriff, or at least wrote a letter that didn't return address itself. I didn't. I drafted 3 sentences to an info address in my head and deleted them in my head too. I ran a half-dozen futures and didn't like any of them. A deputy calling back because a helpful citizen left their number. Officers tromping in and finding nothing, because a community that mobile can melt between ridgelines in an hour. A knock on my door from someone who has a hobby of reminding. People about promises. A week later, a coworker heated solvent. To clean a coil and the smell slid a hook behind my eyes and jerked me straight back into that blue tarp shade. I went outside to take a call and stood behind the dumpster with my hands on my knees until my breath stopped sounding like a paper bag. A month after that, a contractor's truck passed me on New Circle with 4 rolled tarps in the bed, and I had to grip the wheel hard enough to bring the tendons up. It isn't paranoia if the thing you saw is real and has your plate memorized. I still hike. The woods are how I make the noise in my head go quiet. But I listen differently now. I don't step off a ridge toward water unless I can see it, and sometimes I don't even then. I don't follow old four-wheeler tracks just to see where they go. I don't assume quiet means empty. In Daniel Boone, there are hollers that aren't on your map, and communities that do not want to be found by you, or by anyone you might talk to later. If you wander into one of those, you'll know it because the air will change, and your animal brain will stand up inside your skull, and a man with a tidy ponytail will smile like a deacon and tell you to be smart. He wasn't wrong about that part. Smart doesn't always feel brave. Sometimes it just feels like driving home with your hands at 10 and 2, and your radio off, counting the miles out loud so you don't count something else. The trip started like a dozen others I'd taken with my college crew. It was the late May 2019 till, a week after finals at Oregon State, and the four of us, me, Ansel, 22, part-time at a sporting goods shop, finishing an environmental science degree, Kellen, Rafi, and Messi Bramsi needed a reset in the woods. We found a too-cheap cabin listing Kellen dug up and booked it on impulse. The place sat in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, about 2.4 miles out from the closest trailhead, hemmed in by Douglas fir and salal. No service, no Wi-Fi, just cards, beer, and whatever snacks we remembered. Day one delivered. We hiked a quiet spur off the PCT, looped on a little over 10 miles, took corny overlook photos, then limped back to the cabin around 7:30 p.m., with the light still stuck in the trees. The cabin was smaller than the listing suggested. One room with 2 bunk beds, a kitchenette that hadn't been touched since the late 70s, and a bathroom you had to sweet talk so the toilet would stop running. After years of tents, having walls felt decadent. We scorched burgers on an ancient propane stove, played poker with pretzel sticks for chips, and let Bram trot out the same ex-story he's told since freshman year. During 10:15 p.m., boots were by the door, the lantern was out, and everyone was horizontal. Sometime around 12:30 am, I woke up needing to pee. 4th beer, regret. The room was black except for the green pulse from Rafi's fitness watch. I fished my phone up for a flashlight and slide-stepped between packs. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the deck. Not the skitter of a raccoon, human, slow, deliberate. 3 or 4 boards creaked, a 10-second pause, then more. Whoever it was made a circuit, stopping at windows like they were on a tour. Rafi sat up in the lower bunk, face pale in the watch glow. He mouthed, "What the hell?" I could hear my pulse in my ears. The steps rounded toward the front window. I lifted the curtain a finger's width and peeked. Moonlight drew a man about 10 feet out, tall, jacket and jeans, standing perfectly still, head tilted toward the cabin. He didn't move for maybe half a minute. Then he turned, unhurried, and melted back into the firs like a bad thought. We woke Kellen and Bram in whispers. Kellen, default skeptic, said it was probably a lost hiker or the property owner doing a drive-by. Bram said what we were all thinking. Who checks a rental at midnight by circling and peeking? We dragged the heavy dresser in front of the door. It screeched across the floorboards like a saw. Rafi grabbed the cast-iron skillet. Bram white-knuckled his pocket knife. Kellen hefted a trekking pole like a spear. I had the phone keypad open, even though we all knew there was no signal. We sat in the dark, 4 grown men with kid eyes, listening to pine cones tap the roof and the fridge hum like a distant generator. About 45 minutes crawled by. 1:15 am, and fear thinned to nervous jokes. We were starting to feel stupid when the doorknob turned not rattled, tested. A slow try. Once, twice, then stillness. Footsteps again, heavier this time, crossed to the side window, the one we hadn't covered because it faced the trees. A face pressed to the glass, hands cupped around the eyes. 40s, scraggly beard, ball cap pulled low. He fogged the pane and scanned. Even in near dark, I felt him lock onto us. He vanished. 5 long minutes of nothing but our breathing. Then a rasp from the back wall made the hair on my arms lift. Metal on metal. The sound of tools. Kellen whispered, "There's a little shed out back. Owner said maintenance stuff lives in it." Rustling, sorting, footsteps returning. No more testing. This time it was a thunk on the door. Then another. Wood cracked. The deadbolt groaned in the frame. Rafi didn't wait. He yelled, "We called the police. They're on the way. Get out." A bluff, the pounding paused. A voice seeped through, rough, slurred. "Ain't no police coming out here, boys. Just want to talk. Open up." The way he said boys made my skin prickle. He knew what we were. He'd watched long enough to sort us. Bram hit record on his phone and set it on a shelf facing the door. Kellen tore the fire extinguisher off its bracket. The pounding came harder, each hit chewing the jam around the deadbolt. Tiny paint chips fell like snow. When the door finally failed, it did it fast. The frame splintered, and the slab popped inward until it slammed the dresser, holding at a gap of maybe 8 inches. An arm shot through, fingers clawing for purchase, then bracing to shove. Kellen blasted the extinguisher into the gap. White chemical powder belched across the arm and the deck outside. The guy yanked back, choking, cursing, boots scraping as he stumbled. We shoved to reset the dresser. My shoulder barked. Bram dumped his pack, a camping hatchet, a coil of rope, and, mercifully, the can of Chium bear spray. He'd packed despite our earlier clowning. He came back angrier, wiping foam with his sleeve. He kicked again. The dresser skidded another inch, our sneakers squealing as we leaned in. Through the gap I saw him clearly. Weather-chewed face, eyes too bright. A flannel with reflective stripes like road crews wear. He jammed a crowbar into the opening and leaned his weight. The dresser crept, inch by inch. Kellen squeezed the extinguisher again. Thin and weak now, more mist than spray. The man coughed once and kept prying. Bram didn't hesitate. He thrust his hand through the gap with the bear spray and emptied the can into the man's eyes. The sound that came back wasn't human for a beat. He howled, reeled, and went off the deck, thumping the ground, rolling, screaming strings of broken words. We moved like a drill. Rafi and I flipped the kitchen table and jammed it against the dresser. Kellen ripped mattresses off bunks and propped them against the uncurtained window. Bram hovered over the gap with the hatchet, ready to hack at the first wrist that snaked back in. Outside, he blundered, colliding with a rake, kicking a plastic tote. He moaned, he swore, he sobbed. Then we heard something I didn't believe at first. Sirens. Faint then swelling. Red and blue flickered through the trees. "Emergency SOS," Rafi blurted. He'd tried 911 earlier and thought it failed, but his phone must have pushed a satellite-style SOS anyway. Some models do that now. Maybe we got lucky with a ping. Maybe we just bought time. The sirens grew. Headlights jittered along the access road. The man's moaning cut off. Brush tore. He crashed into the trees. 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up at EUN 245 AM. Lights painting the walls. They swept the deck with flashlights, then waved us out. We told the story 3 times in the yard while our adrenaline fizzled. One Deputy Morelsmes, listened, then traded a look with her partner. When we described the beard, the reflective flannel, the hard stare, she nodded like a puzzle piece clicked. "Sounds like Harlan Voss," she said. "Fired from a logging outfit a couple months back. Been living rough. We've had reports watching hikers creeping around closed cabins, trying doors. He's slippery. They found him around Pupoy 15M, wedged in a drainage culvert a bit over us, a mile and down, still pawing at his eyes. We spent the rest of the dark hours at the substation, paper cups of bitter coffee, writing statements until the timeline felt like it belonged to someone else. Detectives filled in what we hadn't known. Voss had a record, DV, trespass, DUI. Losing his job spun him out. Forest Service had bounced him twice for camping in day-use lots, and there were 3 open reports of him shadowing hikers. Always later in the day, past 45 p.m., when the woods got hollow and quiet. "You did the right things," Detective Kincaid said. "Stayed together, barricaded, used what you had, didn't let him breach. Once he's inside, it's corners and bad options. We drove back to Corvallis in that bright, mean morning at Yachi 8:15 Jaws tight, the car too quiet. No radio, no jokes. I haven't camped since. People latch onto the bear spray moment like that's the moral. Maybe it is. But what sticks with me is quieter. The slow walk past windows, the test on the knob. The certainty when he said no police were coming. The patience. He'd been out there long enough to learn our shapes through glass, to learn our rhythms, to trust that a crowbar and midnight might be enough. If you ever go that far down a road, cheap rental, no neighbors, no bars on your phone, pack the boring things, an extinguisher that isn't expired, a headlamp for every head, a blanket for the window you don't need to cover, a can of spray you won't mock, stack furniture without shame, lie loudly, believe the footsteps, and if night brings knuckles to your door, remember, not all knocks are asking. Some are telling. The first thing I remember is the dog refusing to move. Sunday morning, search base set up in a gravel pullout, topo maps pinned to the hood of a ranger truck, thermoses steaming in the cold. The shepherd had rock-solid posture all morning, until we reached a particular Douglas fir 3 miles up the trail. Then he sat, made a sound that wasn't quite a bark or a whine, and scraped his paw against the root flare like there was an invisible wall in front of him. That was where they told me they'd last placed my brother. I'm a high school biology teacher in Montana. The rational one, the person who lectures freshmen on controls and variables, and how nature follows rules even when we don't know them yet. My brother Nathan, 29, physical therapist, hiked alone on weekends the way some people meditate. Glacier National Park was his happy place. He'd go up for goats and air and a long quiet. He always texted me a trailhead selfie before he vanished from service, and another when he was back at the truck, like clockwork. He sent the first at 8:45 a.m. that Saturday, Highline trail sign, sun just catching the cliffs, and that hideous bright orange jacket our mom bought so he couldn't get accidentally shot, even though you can't hunt in the park. Caption starting out back by Senuisam Sioux, I replied with a traffic cone joke. He sent a thumbs up. That's the last normal thing in this story. Fi what IPM may. I still hadn't gotten his back at the truck text. I called. Voicemail. I told myself he'd stopped to watch goats or had no bars or lost track of time. Dorito 6 and Wise PM me as I called the park. I tried to sound measured. Experienced hiker, reliable check-ins. This is out of character. 2 rangers drove the road, checked lots. His blue Toyota was where he left it, locked. Wallet under the passenger seat, his habit, a granola wrapper on the dash. Nothing out of place, which is its own kind of wrong. That's when a couple from Wisconsin, Anderson, came forward. They'd met him around 1:20 p.m. when he'd offered to take their picture at a viewpoint. 10 minutes later, they passed him again, this time at a nondescript bend framed by a single big fir. His pack was off. He was looking up through the branches like bird watchers do. Everything okay? They asked. He smiled so big they remembered it 12 hours later. Just perfect, actually, he said. Not fine. Yep, just perfect. The big search kicked off at 7 a.m. Sunday. 20 volunteers, 3 dog teams, a helicopter. I drove up in the dark and stood there useless while a ranger named Fielding ran her pencil down a grid overlay and told me most people are found within 2 days. Tired, embarrassed, thirsty. I nodded like that was a spell we were choosing together. The dogs took Nathan's scent at his truck, like it was printed on the air. They followed it clean for 3 miles. Footbridge, switchback, a slant of cliff with a chain handhold, straight to that fir. Then the scent hit that invisible wall. The shepherd sat, scraped, moaned. Tom, the handler, circled and circled, eyes narrowed as if a different angle would trick physics into cooperating. Same result every time. What waited at the base of the tree was surgical. Nathan's pack leaned upright, zippers closed. 2 full liters of water, lunch wrapped, orange whistle on the strap. His phone in the side pocket, 47%, battery, 4 bars. Inside the pack, tucked neatly, his boots, with his socks rolled into the cuffs like he'd been ready to do laundry. No drag marks, no scuffs in the duff. It had rained 2 days before. The soil still took an impression if you stepped hard. There were none. Not for boots, not bare. Not a deer trail cutting off through the huckleberry. Nothing. Trackers came who can follow a week-old elk across rock. They shrugged and chewed their toothpicks and said variations of, there should be something. I spent the next 2 weeks sleeping in my car at the trailhead, hiking to that spot every morning, watching perfect strangers step over a place that had become a question mark. Some would pause there for water and have no idea the ground under them had been combed by 20 people in a line with flagging tape. The tree watched all of us with whatever indifference trees possess. Word spreads on a trail faster than you'd think. That's how a retiree named Gregory Watts found me. 30 years walking that loop, he said. When I showed him the exact tree, he took a long breath and told me a name I didn't know. Carol Dunham, 1987. Same place, same pattern. Packed tidy, boots stowed, no prints, no remains. We used to call this bend a quiet spot, he said. Like the land swallows sound here. He kept hiking after that because what else do you do when a sentence like that drops between you and a stranger? By the end of the third week, after cadaver dogs, a thermal drone, and a ground-penetrating radar rig they borrowed from a university, the park called the official search. The FBI pressed in briefly, because the arrangement of Nathan's things and the digital breadcrumbs looked unlike a sprain or a fall. Staged disappearance, money untouched. Passport in his desk, apartment the same kind of midweek mess he always left it, dishes in the sink, laundry mid-cycle. Nothing that looked like premeditation. A special agent named Coleman said something to me in the hallway she probably shouldn't have. Usually there's a seam. You tug at it, something gives. With your brother, every stitch is tight. It's perfectly wrong. I asked what that meant. She rubbed her temple. It means we don't have the seam. There were seams of a different kind, if you were willing to talk to the people who clip newspaper clippings. 4 months later, a woman named Janet Holloway asked to meet at a diner outside the park. Her daughter, Rebecca, had walked into Yellowstone in 2016 and never walked out. Her folder held 23 cases from different parks with the same details repeated like a ritual. Neatly arranged pack, phone still powered, shoes removed and placed as if they had value, no trace of leaving. In the week before she vanished, Rebecca told Janet she'd met a hiker who talked about thin places, not mystical in the sparkles and smoke way, but places in wild country where your brain insists you should stop and step 1 inch sideways. He told her never to take her shoes off if she felt it, Janet said. Said it was like leaving the door open. I wanted to laugh because I teach kids how to annotate controlled experiments. Instead, I wrote shoes in my notebook and underlined it 3 times. 6 months after Nathan went missing, one of his co-workers, Bradley, called. He'd cleared out Nathan's clinic desk and found a spiral notebook with patient notes. The last 3 pages weren't about PT plans. They were dream descriptions, dated night after night for 2 weeks before the hike. Trails he knew but wrong, trees growing at angles trees don't, a path that sloped up until it wasn't path anymore, footsteps behind him that sounded like his own but half a beat late. The last line, written the night before he left, the footsteps keep matching me. Maybe they aren't following, maybe they're waiting for me to catch up. I read those pages until I could quote them. Then I stopped reading them because quote became rote became superstition. Almost a year later, I went back alone, because closure is a word we pretend is a place. Noon sun, clear day, tourists on the ridge, goats like white commas on black rock above. I stood at the fir with both palms on the bark and told it that I had a life I needed to return to, that I would keep coming back until it gave me anything. It gave me initials. They were carved high, 7 feet up, cut lines weather softened but readable. CD 1987. Above them less weathered. Or H 2016. I didn't breathe for a full count of 5 before I scanned higher and saw fresh cuts, sap still weeping. NP 2024. Nathan never carved trees. Leave no trace was a religion with him. I took photos, walked back toward the pass until my phone showed bars and called the park. 2 rangers and a forensics tech met me at 2:15 p.m. We hiked back in. The bark was smooth when we arrived. No initials, no pitch scars, no tool marks. I held out my phone with the photos and watched their faces settle into the expression you reserve for grieving people who might be seeing things. One suggested a counselor he knows in Kalispell. I said thank you because I was raised polite. You can stop reading now if you need a neat bow. There isn't one. Nathan's last pings show his phone's location services updating normally until 1:45 p.m. Static at the tree, and then simply ceasing, not killed, not out of range. The little blue dot kept being a phone with power and reception that just refused to say where it was. The Andersons, bless them, sent me a holiday card with a handwritten note. "We can't shake that smile," she wrote. Not the one he gave us earlier for the picture. The one by the tree. Looked like a person who just figured out an answer. Gregory still hikes past the fir. He sent me a postcard last week that only said, "It was quiet again." As for me, I don't step onto trails anymore. Still teach photosynthesis and succession and how lichens colonize rock. I keep Nathan's orange jacket zipped in a garment bag in my closet, because seeing it makes my lungs flutter. Some nights I dream the High Line lays itself out on the floor of my bedroom. I take one step and another, and the footsteps behind me land a half-beat late. Exactly mine, patient. The case is officially open. There will be files and numbers and a line on a spreadsheet that says unresolved. I understand why rangers won't talk about quiet spots in microphones. You can't put that on a park brochure. But there's a place 3 miles in where a dog sat down like the air got too thick to breathe and scraped the earth with his paw as if to say, "Here, no farther." I tell my students that science is a conversation the universe will always show up for, if you ask in the right language. I still believe that. I just have to live with the fact that some answers have to be given where we can't hear them. The last thing Nathan texted me was a joke about cones. The last thing the Andersons heard him say was just perfect. I don't know if he found what he meant to find. I only know that something, someone, the land, a rule we don't have words for, kept him. And every time I pass a Douglas fir in town, my palms itch to touch the bark and check for initials I know won't be there. By Friday afternoon, my classroom looked like a glitter bomb had gone off. Paint trays stacked like poker chips, brushes soaking in a coffee can, the kiln's vent ticking as it cooled. I'm an elementary art teacher in a tiny Pennsylvania college town, which means my week runs on bells and bulletin boards. By Mars, I'm herding tiny masterpieces to drying racks. I'm sweeping and wondering when I last saw the sun without a cinder block wall in the way. Hiking is the pressure valve. I plan my escapes the way other people plan brunch. The night before a trail day, I line everything up on the counter like a still life. Map folded to the right quadrant. Headlamp, first aid kit, 3 liters of water. The same battered pepper spray I've carried since grad school. I set 2 alarms and 1 backup, tape a post-it with my route to the door for good luck, and try to sleep. That first Saturday in April, I didn't bother with snooze. Alarm at 5:30 am, boots by the door at 6:60 cm, diner coffee at 6:30 am, burnt and perfect, and northbound by 6:45 am, with the windows cracked to let in the cold, clean air. Pine Creek Gorge was the target. The locals call it the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, and it earns the title when the fog unspools off the rims like silk. I rolled into the northern trailhead at DM7 Wamarim. 2 other cars, damp air, 50 degrees. The whole forest smelling like rain had just rinsed it clean. Perfect. I packed like I always did. 3 liters of water, homemade bars, small first aid kit, pepper spray on my belt, phone, and a charger. The loop was familiar. 12 miles, done it at least 15 times, back to the lot by was 3 p.m. Wire, then burger and trivia in town. That was the plan. About 3 miles in, the trail started angling toward the ridge overlook. Through the trees, a thin column of smoke stitched upward maybe 200 yards off to my left. Not wildland smoke, too tight and steady. Campfire, I figured. Except there aren't established sites in that stretch. A strange scent drifted in. Herbs, sweet and metallic. Something chemical under it like hot pennies. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stepped off trail, ducking through scratchy thorn canes and snagging branches. Boots slipping on last fall's damp leaves. Voices bled through the understory. Low, layered, not quite chanting but locked into a rhythm. When I finally saw them, I froze. 5 men sat around a small fire in a rough circle. Nothing theatrical about their clothes, hiking jackets, and beat-up boots, but something about them didn't belong. Each held a length of wood, 8 inches long and broom handle thick, shaving into it with pocket knives. Their hands moved in sync like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. The chant was a monotone braid. It wasn't English, not Spanish, not anything I recognized. The one facing me had a shaved head and a crescent-shaped birthmark above his left ear. He clocked me first and didn't blink. He just kept carving while he stared. One by one, the others turned too. No hello, no need help. Just 5 pairs of eyes and 5 knives working. Shavings falling like pale curls onto dark leaves. Details popped all at once. The red-bearded guy's jacket elbows were patched with duct tape. The youngest wore a collarbone-to-jaw tattoo that looked like black roots crawling up his neck. Acne scars pitting both cheeks. And the marks they were cutting weren't random. They were precise, patterned. Letters from a language I didn't know. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, I managed. My voice sounded high and wrong. I shifted a step back. The bald one tipped his head, almost canine, then lifted his stick and held it out for me to see. 3 interlocking triangles. A spiral punched into the center. Beneath that, a stick figure with too many arms. Smoke drifted my way, stinging my eyes. Beside the fire sat a metal bucket with dark, oily liquid. Every so often, one of them dipped his carved stick into it, and the symbols drank the sheen. The 4th man stood. He was huge, 6'4", easy brown canvas jacket stiff with old grime, hair yanked back with what looked like a shoelace, eyes so deep-set they read as black. He didn't come at me. He shifted to the side. On my other flank, the 5th man stood too. They were widening the circle without making it look like a circle. The rooted neck tattoo kid began to hum. A low drone the others picked up, one by one, until it buzzed under my skin. My brain started screaming, "Run!" Instead, I gave this pathetic little wave and said, "Well, have a good hike." Like I'd just wandered into a book club, then turned toward the brush and did my best impression of not running. It took forever to get back through. Every twig I snapped sounded like a gunshot. When my boots hit the main trail, I let myself speed walk. 5 minutes, no footsteps, no voices. My pulse eased, and I even laughed at myself. Weird guys doing a weird forest church thing. Fine, not my business. A branch cracked behind me, 50 yards back maybe. Then another. The gaps between the sounds were too even. Someone trying to keep the same distance. I pulled out my phone, no bars. Not surprising, but it felt like the bottom dropping out. The ranger station sat about 2 miles ahead, where the loop kisses the blue blaze down to the creek. 2 miles is nothing, except when you're listening for footsteps. I jogged. The hum started again, louder now from both sides of the trail. I caught flashes through the trees. The green jacket here, the brown canvas there. They knew the shortcuts. They knew the terrain. They fanned out, keeping pace without breaking that measured, horrible calm. The hum cut off. Silence fell so hard I could hear my pulse thud in my jaw. Their footsteps shifted wider, like they were herding me toward something. A wind-thrown giant lay across the trail ahead, root ball jutting up like a muddy wall 8 feet high. I had to slow to climb. Behind me, the bald man stepped onto the trail, 30 feet back, walking, not running. Gray eyes pinned to me, carved stick in his hand. The tattooed one slipped out of the understory beyond him, with a loop of braided bark in his fist. I swung a leg over the slick trunk, slipped, slammed my knee, swore, and dropped to the other side. My right ankle bit hard when I landed. I didn't look back. The trail curved toward a series of built wooden steps. If I could hit those first, I might gain some ground. I rounded the bend and stopped cold. The tall one in the brown jacket was already there at the bottom of the steps, perfectly placed. Steep drop to my right, 40 feet into a rocky creek bed. Thorn jungle to my left. Footsteps behind, then stillness. The semicircle closed without touching me. Pepper spray. My fingers fumbled the safety tab. I held it out, switching aim between the man below and the men behind. The bald one stopped 20 feet back. Spread around him, the others held their carved sticks like talismans. The tall man took a single step up. My mouth made a sound I didn't know I had in me, and I sprayed in a bright, angry cloud. The stream caught him square in the eyes. He reeled, choking, hands to his face. I didn't wait to see who moved next. I sprinted past while he stumbled, shoulder checked him as I went, and took the steps 3 at a time. My ankle howled. I didn't listen. Shouting chased me, actual words now, jagged and far, underplayed by the thud of my heartbeat. The ranger station's brown siding and green roof rose like a dream between the trees. I hit the door at a dead run, shoved inside, and must have looked feral. Mud streaks, mystery scratches, tears and snot. Pepper spray gripped like a dagger. The ranger, an older woman with a silver braid and a nameplate that said Garrett, took one look, keyed her radio, and spoke in clipped calm bursts. Within 15 minutes, 3 more rangers and 2 state troopers were there. They swept the area for over 2 hours. They found the fire, ash still warm, wood shavings everywhere, each curled strip tattooed with the same sharp symbols. The bucket had soaked into the dirt as a dark, greasy stain. They photographed all of it, collected what they could. They didn't find the men. Officer Garrett drove behind me back to the lot, then tailed me all the way home to make sure I actually went inside. I filed a full report. Detective called on Monday, another on Wednesday. Nothing stuck. No group camp permits. No trail cams caught faces. No weird guys' complaints that matched mine. Early April at Pine Creek is quiet. They use that I still hike, but never alone. They leave my route and return time with 2 people. I carry a second spray canister and a whistle around my neck. I don't cut through brush for smoke that doesn't belong to a campsite, and I don't hike Pine Creek Gorge anymore. Sometimes when I'm washing paintbrushes after school, I see that stick the bald man held up. 3 triangles locked together, a spiral drilled through the center, the little figure with too many arms, and I taste that sweet metal smell at the back of my throat. I tell myself they were just a strange church in the woods. I tell myself they didn't want me, but I can still feel the moment the humming stopped, and the trail went quiet, and 5 men spread wider without ever speeding up, like the path wasn't mine anymore, like the trees had decided which way I was going to run. We only wanted a quiet afternoon, the kind where the trail steals the noise out of your head. I drove. Lauren navigated. Emily tossed a blanket and a sleeve of granola bars into my pack. We parked by the visitor center, waved at a ranger, and set off with that lazy confidence you get on a loop you've read is family-friendly. The plan was simple. Hike to an overlook, spread the blanket, talk about nothing, and be back before dusk. For the first couple miles, the woods were chatter and color, strollers squeaking, dogs jangling their tags, the sweet rot of leaves lifting off the path in little puffs. We nodded at couples, stepped aside for a puffing trail runner, and barely noticed the man in the faded green windbreaker until he was past us. No backpack, hands sunk in his pockets like he didn't trust them not to fidget. He didn't smile, didn't scowl. He was a neutral blur between birches. I forgot him before we rounded the next bend. Halfway to the overlook, the light thinned. Shadows started laying themselves across the path, long enough to trip on. Emily, who was leading, stopped so abruptly I bumped her pack. She tilted her chin ahead. The man in the green jacket leaned against a signpost, Maple Loop, like it belonged to him. He wasn't reading it. He was looking through it. At us. He must have taken a shortcut, I whispered, because saying anything else would have put the wrong shape on what we were thinking. We walked by without stopping. The polite trail nod felt ridiculous now, like a rule from a game we weren't playing anymore. He didn't return it. He watched each of us pass as if counting, not curious, not friendly, just taking inventory. We told ourselves stories to cover the silence. He's meeting someone. He's birding, and we're in the way. He's the kind of person who hikes with nothing because he lives nearby. The words tasted thin. At a fork, the trail split, left back toward the main loop right into deeper, darker woods. We kept left. After a few minutes, we heard boots on gravel behind us. One pair, not running, not meandering. The steady rhythm was its own kind of message. Lauren said too brightly, "Water break!" We slid to the side, uncapped bottles, stared at the trees like they were fascinating. The footsteps slowed too, then hovered. He didn't pass. He didn't close the gap. He just stayed. Always the same distance, like we were walking on a string he was holding. "Let's pick it up," Emily murmured. We did. So did he. The trail emptied as the light bled out of the canopy. Dogs and joggers vanished. The friendly clatter of a busy afternoon fell away until it was just our breathing and his footfalls, matching us like an echo. We started talking too loud. Dinner plans, a class we all hated. Anything to build a little sound between us and that steady tread. At some point, I stopped pretending not to look back. He was always there. Jacket zipped to the collar, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly, eyes tracking us like we were migrating. If I met his gaze, he didn't look away. He didn't do anything. That was the part that made it worse. We cut toward the access road when the map on Emily's phone finally grudged us a faint GPS ping. We crashed through the understory. Briar grabs, twigs snapping, leaves hissing around our ankles. I found myself listening harder behind us than ahead, flinching at every sound we made because it could disguise one of his. The road showed up as a pale ribbon through the trunks, gravel bright in the last light. I could have wept with relief. We spilled out onto the road, bent double for 2 breaths, then straightened, and froze. Farther up, where the trees thinned toward the visitor center, the man in green stepped from the woods like he'd been there the whole time. The angle of his shoulders was almost relaxed. He faced us squarely, then started walking, hands still in his pockets. Lauren's fingers closed on my arm so hard I felt bone. Emily's mouth flattened. There were no cars in sight, just the pale road and the breath of evening pushing along it. None of us said anything. We just ran. The road tipped gently downhill, the kind of curve that hums in your calves. My pack straps bit. My breath scraped. Behind us, his footfalls shifted. Shorter bursts, a stutter of speed. Then back to that even tempo, like he could reel us in whenever he felt like it. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. He was there because he had been there at every turn. The visitor center appeared the way safe places do in dreams. Too far, then suddenly near. A ranger truck idled out front, headlights on. 2 staffers stood talking by the door. One of them saw us, pointed, called out something we couldn't hear. That was enough. I risked a glance. The man had stopped at the tree line where the road broke out into the parking lot's clean geometry. He watched us cross into the light. He didn't turn his head when the ranger called again, didn't react to the engine. He stood so still he looked like part of the woods. Then he pivoted, precise as a compass, and slid back between the trunks. The green of his jacket swallowed in seconds. We told the rangers everything. Jacket color, height, the way he managed to be ahead of us and behind us with no sign of a cutoff. The hands in his pockets. The not smiling. One of the staffers took notes like a court reporter. The other radioed down the access road. An officer with a flashlight headed out, his beam swinging through the trees like a slow metronome. No one found him. We sat on the edge of a planter while the sky went from strips of orange to a single flat gray. They asked the questions they're trained to ask. Did he speak to you? No. Did he ever close within arm's reach? Not quite. Did he brandish anything? No, we never saw his hands. Did he follow you to your car? We didn't go to our car until a ranger walked us. On the drive home with the heater on high and the road a black ribbon under the headlights, we probed the evening like a bruise. We tried to name what he did that turned a crowded trail into a corridor. It wasn't illegal to walk on the same path as us. It wasn't illegal to appear again and again at the next bend. It wasn't illegal to be deliberate, but it felt like a plan pressed flat. I haven't gone back to a secluded trail since. I tell myself it's because schedules changed, because life got busy, because lifting at the gym is easier on my knees than switchbacks. The truth is simpler. I know how far a steady pace can reach. I know what it's like when the woods get organized around a person who isn't you. And I know that some afternoons are just fine until they aren't. Until a man in a faded jacket steps out of the trees exactly where you were hoping there would be no one at all. We took off during fall break because we both needed to be somewhere that wasn't a classroom or a checkout counter. We rolled out of the city around 8:15 a.m., coffee in hand, and aimed for a quieter national park, one without shuttle buses or souvenir stands. Just miles of forest where the wind sounded like running water, and you could walk a long time without hearing another voice. We pulled into the trailhead lot close to by 10:30 a.m. A handful of cars, crisp air, that early day brightness that makes you think you'll have all the time in the world. The marked trail was easy to love. Blazes on trunks, a path worn smooth by polite boots, the occasional bridge slick with leaf pulp. The canopy had gone copper and ember. Sunlight came through in coins that slid across our sleeves as we moved. It had that pleasant hush you get in the shoulder season. Enough people to feel civilized, not enough to feel watched. A little ways in, Daniel paused beside a cluster of pines. Someone had carved arrows into the bark, rough knife-slashed chevrons pointing off the official route. Not spray paint, not a prank. The cuts were deliberate and all facing the same direction, leading into thicker trees where the ground went from tamped-down dirt to a web of roots and damp duff. He shot me a look I've known since we were kids. I said we didn't know where it went, that it wasn't on the map, that the day would shorten faster under trees. He grinned, said something about bonus miles, and stepped off the trail like he'd been invited. At first, it felt like a secret, our breaths fogging just a little in the shade. The smell of cedar pitch and wet earth, a path barely there, but still there. Every time the faint track seemed to dissolve, another arrow appeared, hacked into a trunk right where you'd start to doubt. Whoever made them knew where uncertainty lived. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Park sounds, distant voices, a creek keeping score somewhere out of sight fell away. Even the birds seemed to narrow their conversations to whispers. The ground changed under our boots, softer, springier, with roots humping through like buried ribs. Official trails have a certain look, boot-polished dirt, the odd granola wrapper someone missed. This was the opposite. No litter, no benches, nothing human except the knife work. Time turned blurry, the way it does under trees. Light thinned, not sunset thin, just forest thin. Daniel kept up the treasure hunt energy. I kept counting arrows and how each one showed up right where you'd want to turn around. We reached a small clearing and stopped. In the middle sat a stump, bark shaved off, top sanded flat by weather or hands. The same arrow was carved there, large and careful, like a logo. Daniel touched the groove with 2 fingers and smiled. I didn't. The thing that rattled me wasn't the mark itself. It was what it meant. This wasn't random. Someone made this route on purpose, and they wanted strangers to keep going. Past the stump, the arrows got sloppier, like whoever was cutting them started to hurry. The air felt heavier. Our conversation had run out of clever. My phone showed the little mountain triangle where bars should be. The battery icon suddenly looked smaller than it had a minute earlier. Another clearing, stranger. Branches leaned together to form a crude blind against a stand of trees. Not a shelter, more like something a hunter would crouch in, except it faced a tangle of nothing. The planks were scarred with the same arrow over and over, until the wood looked diseased with it. Daniel tried a joke that didn't land. The hair on my arms did its own thinking. Back, I said. He started to argue, then saw my face and didn't. We turned with that particular kind of relief that happens before you realize you're not actually relieved yet. Here's the trick no one warns you about. Going back on an unmarked route is never just the route in reverse. The woods tilt themselves a quarter inch while you're not looking. The shadows move the furniture. We tried to follow our own prints and failed because there weren't any. Duff rebounds. Moss forgives. Every third tree looked like the last one. Every tree with an arrow made me feel smaller. We tried logic. If the ground slopes, follow the fall line. Water tends toward roads. The forest didn't laugh at that, but it didn't help either. Somewhere to our left, something smelled faintly like a candle put out with wet fingers. Smoke, maybe. No campgrounds marked out here. The arrows kept appearing whether we wanted them or not, gently insisting. The confidence I'd felt on the main trail had been rented. The lease came due. The silence got thick enough to notice. No scolding jays, no chipmunks pretending to be bears in the brush, just our boot soles and breath and that hush that makes ears ring. We made a decision that wasn't brave so much as practical. Stop obeying the arrows. We angled away from them whenever they reappeared, taking whatever path the terrain allowed, skirting deadfall, sidestepping the slick guts of rotting logs. We were no longer hiking so much as negotiating. When we heard water, it sounded like a promise from another room. First a hush like traffic far away, then the miniature roar of a stream showing off at a bend. We chased it through bracken and low blueberry and a patch of ferns that slapped our shins wet. It wasn't big, just a seam of clear cold sliding over stones, but it ran with conviction in one direction. Streams feed roads or trails or bigger streams. We followed. The banks forced us to cross and recross, slick rocks rolling under boots, one of us grabbing the other's sleeve, both of us pretending we hadn't almost fallen twice. At one bend we found a beaver-chewed stump bright as bone. At another, deer tracks soft in the mud, proof that something here trusted a path. Then, like a word arriving suddenly on your tongue, a painted blaze appeared on a trunk across the water, fresh and unapologetic. The sight made my knees weak in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. We clambered up that bank, found the ribbon of tamped earth, and stood with our hands on our hips like people do when they don't want to admit they'd been scared. The walk back felt longer than the walk out, though it wasn't. The air cooled into that late-day bite. A pair of runners passed us, headlamps already on like halos. When the parking lot finally opened between the trees and our car sat exactly where we'd left it, dusted with pine pollen. 2 granola wrappers in the cup holder. We checked the clock on the console, just shy of 6:45 p.m. We didn't tell the ranger. We told ourselves we'd sound like idiots. 2 adults who followed knife-scratched arrows into a place that wasn't on the map and didn't want to be. Back home, we checked forums and old trail reports. Nothing. No mention of a side path like that or a blind covered in the same mark. Sometimes I still look and still find nothing. I keep thinking about whoever made those carvings, the patience it took to place an assurance exactly where a person's doubt would bloom. The arrows never circled back. They only ever pointed deeper. That's what stays with me. Someone wanted strangers to say yes, and they made sure the no would be hard to find.